The controversy generated by that decision was yet to die down when another panel of the Apex Court, also in a unanimous decision, held that David Lyon, elected as governor of Bayelsa State on the platform of the All Progressives Congress, APC, should not be sworn in, and that his election was voided on the grounds that his running mate, or deputy governor-elect, was not qualified because he presented forged identities. Now, it is instructive that this pre-election case started before the elections were held on November 16, 2019. It is also instructive to note that David Lyon and his deputy were already preparing for their inauguration, which was just hours away when the Supreme Court gave its verdict. In the Imo case, Honorable Emeka Ihedioha had been in the office of governor for 7 clear months before the Supreme Court's decision. We cannot also forget the Zamfara case, which was a pre-election intra-party dispute. Shortly after the elections were conducted, the pre-election case got to the Supreme Court, which by a unanimous decision held that all the candidates that emerged from the disputed APC primaries were not qualified to be so presented as candidates, and the APC had no legal candidates in the elections. In the consequential orders, the court voided their elections, declared the votes cast for the APC as wasted votes, and then directed INEC to issue certificates of return to the PDP candidates that came second in all the elections. Now the 3 decisions by the Supreme Court have become rallying points for those who challenge the infallibility of the Apex Court. The implication is that a big question mark is being cast on the integrity of the whole electoral process in Nigeria. There are suggestions that the judiciary has come under undue pressure from many angles. The sheer volume of cases they have to deal with within time frames, the overbearing and corrupting influence of politicians aided by their lawyers. Now the parties are back before the Supreme Court asking the Apex Court to reverse itself in all the 3 decisions. So if the court bows to the pressure of fresh applications and reopens these cases, and somehow the court reverses itself, what will be the implication of the novel situation? What will be the implication of this on the established legal principles of the Apex Court being infallible and being final forever, even if it makes mistakes? Now, knowing Nigerian politicians for whom they are, will this not open the floodgates to more requests of this nature? Yet, it's also dangerous to suggest or imagine that some of these obvious errors made by the Supreme Court will not be corrected and could form legal precedents. Whichever option taken here, there are dangers and landmines. All these unending litigations, are they not dangerous for the growth of our democracy? So the Supreme Court has inadvertently tossed a coin. Head or tail, there are dire implications, and the Apex Court may come out bruised. What do we need to do to get out of this quagmire? That's the puzzle we are putting together this evening. Senator Victor Umeh has seen it all in all these areas as national chairman of a political party and a candidate who had to traverse the labyrinth of the law and the court to get an electoral mandate. Senator Victor Umeh is our guest tonight on JIGSAW.
A very warm evening to you, wherever you're listening to us on JIGSAW tonight. And of course, as you heard there, our guest is here, Distinguished Senator Victor Umeh, the senator that represented Anambra Central Senatorial District 2015 to 2019. Tried to come back, but that wasn't successful. But then that was after some litigation as well. Veteran of election litigation cases, Distinguished Senator Victor Umeh is there. Good evening.
Yeah, good evening, Gbenga. Welcome, viewers.
Talking about election litigations, like I said, you're a veteran in all of the. Probably there's nobody more qualified than you to discuss this issue. I mean, right from trying to take control of ABGA, went up and down, all the courts, High Court to Supreme Court, back and forth, and all of that. And of course, when you eventually contested that senatorial election, you were kept outside of the National Assembly for almost 2 years. Correct me if I'm wrong, before you were able to get your mandate.
You are correct, absolutely correct. I agree that I'm a face that is associated with litigations in our democratic process. Principally, most of the time, trying to get the court to make appropriate pronouncements to put people who have decided to operate as if Nigeria does not have laws, to put them in their proper stead. Yeah. So I've always used judicial processes to correct wrong actions in the polity. Starting from when I was national chairman of ABGA, over time, then coming to contest the election that you alluded to, contested the senatorial election in 2015, went to the tribunal, and at the Court of Appeal, I got the election nullified, and my opponents used frivolous litigations to prevent the rerun that was ordered by the final court at that time. They had to do all kinds of things, even seeking a review of the judgment. There's a review going on. You have a review. Yes, in my own case, they went back to the Court of Appeal to review the final judgment of the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal dismissed that and proceeded to the Supreme Court to seek review of the judgment outside the provisions of the Constitution, when it was clear that by Section 246 of the Nigerian Constitution, the Court of Appeal remains the final court for National Assembly and State Assembly post-election disputes. And we continued, and they went back to the Federal High Court again to get an order that a party that had been disqualified will take part in the rerun. We continued ding dong, and they took it to the Supreme Court again on interlocutory appeal. All that wasted 2 years and 6 months.
Of a tenure
of 4 years. And finally, in 2017, the Court of Appeal was able to arrest the situation following an order made by the Supreme Court for expeditious hearing. And the election was conducted 13th of January 2018. An election that had been scheduled for rerun on the 5th of March 2016. INEC had scheduled the date. And just 3 days to that election, the Federal High Court, Abuja, made an order that PDP that was disqualified should take part in the rerun, stoking the long-run processes again. So, but finally, that was it. I was only able to salvage 17 months out of 4 years. Out of 4 years, yes.
This took place in spite of the fact that we also had provisions of the law giving specific time limits for certain things to be done, giving jurisdictions to certain courts as final courts in certain cases.
Yes.
But my worry really is, judging by what is happening now, with people going back asking the Supreme Court to review itself, I'm just wondering whether if you have other courts higher than the Supreme Court in Nigeria, whether politicians will also not, or if it was possible for human beings to have direct access to God, they will probably be calling God out almost on daily basis to come and attend to cases that have been settled.
Yes, it is because of the attitude of many politicians. They always do not want to let go. Even when the law has precluded you from a process, you want to force yourself into the process. And in my own case at that time, the Constitution did not prescribe any limit for determination of cases outside the tribunal proceedings. At that time, it was clear in the Constitution tribunal 180 days, 6 months, then Court of Appeal 60 days, for final appeal in the case of National Assembly and State Assembly elections, and another 60 days to the Supreme Court for governorship election and presidential election. So these were there at that time, but when they go and contrive a suit outside of the election process, they begin to ventilate it up to the Supreme Court. And in most cases, even when issues had become resolved, the authorities will keep referring to pending cases, that, a court made an order against us, like INEC will tell you, a court made an order against us, even though they knew the court made an order that is ultra-virus, per curiam, they begin to obey that order and stall the process, and it has continued. And look at it, what we are faced with today, that the Supreme Court, which is the final court in Nigeria, in deciding any legal disputes, will render a judgment and they will accept it. You go back to it and ask the court to reverse itself when they have given you a final judgment. It goes to show you that so many things are going wrong and many people are not doing what they ought to do. In some cases, yes, some judgments will be delivered and it will appear that certain things are not very right with the judgment, but the Constitution of Nigeria has actually given the Supreme Court the final seal on all litigations. I've also seen in Nigeria, outside the election matters, where the Supreme Court will make an order, a final order over a matter, it will not be executed. You keep going front and back. Court will say go, and the Supreme Court has said this is what it should be. They will say no. They will go back and continue to undermine the orders made by the Supreme Court.
Is there anything that can be done? Because that seems to be more of attitudinal. Because this started long ago.
Yes.
And then incrementally to a big problem that we have now.
Yes.
Started from 2007 or so.
Yeah.
When PDP under the leadership, I call it, because he was the national leader of the PDP, President Obasanjo,
yes,
went on national television at the campaign and said that the PDP would not obey a Supreme Court decision in the Aruleba case.
That was
because the Supreme Court said Aruleba was the validly nominated candidate of the PDP for Anambra governorship election. Igbo governorship election.
Yes.
And President Obasanjo said Aruleba, as far as PDP was concerned, was candidate of the Supreme Court, that the PDP will not obey that order and the PDP will rather not have a candidate in that election.
That's part of the complications we've had in Nigeria's democracy.
That's attitude. How do we address it? Because you can't use law to address attitude.
You see, the matter you referred to during the reign of President Olusegun Obasanjo was just one case in point. When the Supreme Court made an order in the case of Lagos State versus Federal Government of Nigeria on issue of local government,
yes.
Federal government, the Supreme Court made a final order, and President Obasanjo still insisted that the order will not be obeyed. That all the statutory allocations due to local governments in Lagos State will not be paid, will not be released to Lagos State government. And this was a president under a democratic setting. So that will show you that it has to do with the level of our development as a nation, where people will come up and place themselves above the laws of the country they are governing, as the case was then. So it's a question of attitude, but the law, the Constitution is supreme at all material times. If the Supreme Court has been given the final authority over matters that come before it, its judgment should be final. Over time, justices of the Supreme Court have had cause to say that
we're not infallible.
We're not infallible.
We can make mistakes.
But it is what has happened, and the only place you can go to is probably go to God, because we've made this mistake and they allow that to be.
But in politics,
yes.
So when it has to do with political cases, is it also not dangerous to leave the Supreme Court to make mistakes when we know that there are no higher authorities to review such mistakes? Is it not? How do we address the problem? A lot of people have said it is because of the pressure that is brought to bear on the apex court. Pressure in different forms now. Pressure maybe as a result of the fact that the courts have within limited time to look at cases, there are some election cases, and decide them. The other pressure because of the time limit and because of the volume of such cases. Then pressure again from people like you. When I say people like you, I mean politicians. Exactly, yes, politicians who we also want to exert pressure on the justices for them to rule in their favor.
I was reading the other day where a retired justice of the Supreme Court delivered a paper where he cautioned the judges to keep away from politicians. That these are two people that cannot meet. That once judges begin to associate with politicians, then the course of justice will be threatened, yes, will be polluted. And he said, I was reading and I was laughing. There's nothing happening today that the justice did not allude to in that his paper, you know, where he said that politicians can only be seen maybe on television by judges. They should not intermingle, because once you intermingle, then you destroy the system. And what we are experiencing today is that people have refused to detach themselves from what is happening in Nigeria. Usually they say the justice is blind, you know. But today, people who decide some of these cases have made themselves available to be approached, you know. And what we are seeing today are the outcome of such mingling with politicians, because things are the law is clear. Duties are spelled out for everybody under the Constitution. The INEC, the Electoral Commission, has its own statutory duties assigned to it. But INEC, in some cases, leave the job assigned to them by the Constitution and keep windows open for all manners of litigation to come into play after elections are conducted. Because there's a way the electoral umpire will conduct itself. Everybody will appear to be satisfied, but it's hardly the case. If you take the case of,
probably give an example.
Yes, let's take the case of Imo that is overheating the polity. From what I read and I saw, and from interactions and also and other things, 388 polling unit results were under contention. The present governor, Senator Hope Uzodimma, approached the tribunal that the results of 388 polling units were excluded from the collation of the final results for that election. And from further things we saw, it was clear that the person they returned initially as having won the election did not meet the mandatory provision of the Constitution 179 subsection 2, that you must call 1/4 of the total votes cast in at least 2/3 of the local governments in the state. So from what I heard last, former governor Meki Hedioha got 1/4 of those votes in 14 local governments. You know, then one will now ask, why should INEC make a return? You know, in that circumstance where the person did not meet the requirement of the Constitution.
Even if we believe that position, that elections didn't take place in those places where Ohamadike said he won.
Yes, I'm coming back even to that. In those 388 polling units where INEC said
elections
didn't take place, by their rules and guidelines, 388 polling units that had no result were sufficient not to make a return.
happen in the next election, because we now have multiple cases of in fact, substantial non-compliance with the law.
Yeah.
First substantial non-compliance with the law was committed by INEC by returning Emeka Ihedioha as elected when he didn't meet spread.
Yeah.
The second substantial non-compliance has now been committed by the Supreme Court by returning Hope Uzodinma as duly elected when he too, if you have also applied the results now, we also probably not have met the requirement of spread.
Honestly, I'm very used to judicial processes like you've said it here. I don't think it will be fair on anybody to say that the Supreme Court ought to have so much questioned whether Hope Uzodinma got 1/4 of the votes in 2/3 of the local governments, whether he made the spread.
Shouldn't the Supreme Court have done that as the final court? No, knowing that any other thing outside of that court cannot happen.
There are grounds of appeal. When you set out your grounds of appeal, that's what you argue before the Supreme Court or at any appellate court. You cannot go and impute something into things that are not captured by the grounds of appeal. Look at it this way. Because the other side did not give the petition a chance, they didn't start attacking Hope Uzodinma's claim to become governor. You know, they ought to have looked at those results that he
formulate issues
from it as well, and place it before the tribunal. That's the smart way to have done that, so that those issues would have climbed from the tribunal to the Court of Appeal to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court cannot close its eyes on such an issue in deciding this matter. If they look at it and say, okay, let's add your result for you, they were not right by excluding this result, and there is an issue arising from the other side, and even when you add these results to this man, he will not meet the spread. The Supreme Court, I can tell you, the Supreme Court, if that issue was before them in argument, they cannot say go and swear in.
Now that they are bringing it back
for review,
is there a chance, or should that happen? Because if it also, a lot of people also argue that if it happens, the Supreme Court bows to pressure to then take a second look, that the Supreme Court will also be setting another dangerous precedent.
Well. Yes, you see, I have said it very clearly. He pointed it out, it's an attitudinal problem. It's not always that you agree with the judgment of the final court. In my own case, I was decided on November 1. I had an opponent who did not take part in the primaries of her party. Yes, 2019, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she did not take part. She was in APC during the primaries. Primaries were concluded. Even her name was submitted to INEC by APC, and INEC published her name as candidate of APC. You know, after, when all these things had closed, during substitution, she resigned from APC, crossed over to PDP, and was purported to have become a substitute candidate in PDP, a party she did not belong to during the primaries. You know, and when I challenged that at the tribunal and to the court of appeal,
should not have been a pre-election case.
No, you know, the issue is that by the alteration to the constitution, the fourth alteration,
a ground of,
yes, made it a ground section and this provision has been challenged at the Federal High Court. The Federal High Court, I remember it was Honorable Justice Gabriel Kolawole, yes, who determined that provision of Electoral Act will not suffice.
Okay.
Yes, so there was a judgment delivered to that effect, that provision is not sustainable, okay, and struck it down.
But there was
no appeal.
So that Federal Court decision,
yes, is subsisting.
So that means that Federal Court decision has effectively killed.
It has killed that provision. This 142, yes. Okay. And that is why many people, when they make this argument, no, they may not know that there was a Federal High Court judgment that struck down that provision of the Electoral Act, and there was no appeal from it till date.
Okay.
That judgment was delivered, I think, in 2011 or so.
Okay.
And it has nothing has happened.
Okay.
So to that extent,
so that section
is dead.
Is that not part of that?
It's not Electoral Act. It's no longer there. Okay. I'm surprised that they're still reprinting it. Okay. And if you looked at previous judgments after that, yeah, you notice that
courts have been
they've overlooked this provision of the Electoral Act.
Okay.
So once the court comes to a determination that the person who won an election wasn't qualified
yes,
to be a candidate in the election, that's why the courts have been consistently making order that the candidate of the party with the highest number of votes
after the disqualification
of the winner,
yeah,
should be sworn in. Okay. They've made that order severally last year.
Okay.
And in the case of Bayelsa, remember the Supreme Court didn't say go and swear in PDP candidates.
No,
he said the candidate that came second
with the highest
number, the runner-up, first runner-up, that met the constitutional requirement, which talks about spread now.
Yeah.
So they were very clear in the order they made. It's for INEC to go back and look at their books, and find who, even though in this one everybody knew who came second,
yeah,
in Bayelsa, but they didn't say it should be Diri. They said the party that came second with the highest number of votes, valid votes cast, and met the constitutional.
And to do that, you first of all have to discountenance the votes of the APC as wasted votes.
Yes, I was laughing. It happened in Zamfara.
Yeah, when that takes us to Zamfara.
Yes, so let me the correlation I wanted to make. So for this Bayelsa and Zamfara, they are almost the same thing.
Yeah.
When the winners were flushed out in Zamfara, yeah, 35 people, governor, deputy governor,
senator,
3 senators, all the House of Rep members,
6 or 7,
all the House, everybody, APC 100% in Zamfara.
Yes.
And by that judgment of the Supreme Court in May 2019, all of them were removed because of non-conduct of primaries, which was a condition precedent for everybody to take part in any election.
But my worry really now,
yes,
the question arising from that,
yeah,
the Zamfara and Bayelsa cases, yeah, the real worry really is, shouldn't we settle all cases, pre-election cases, before election? Because in Zamfara, what it has brought out glaringly is this: Mukhtar Idris of the APC had won the governorship election by 534,540 votes.
Yes, correct.
The PDP candidate scored only 189,452 votes. Now you said 534,000 votes are wasted votes, and you have now made somebody who came a far second to the governor. I'm just wondering what that does to the psyche of the voters.
It doesn't do anything. Let me tell you what it is. If we begin to give effect to our laws,
yes,
sanity will prevail. I had argued that the number of votes you garner in an election are less important to your complying with the rules.
The process leading to you
to that place. Section 87 of the Electoral Act clearly says that for you, it says, Laura, any political party wishing to sponsor a candidate in an election to be conducted by the Independent National Electoral Commission shall conduct primaries to select its candidates. They've been abusing this all the time. It's a mandate. Shall is a mandatory requirement. I've been arguing this over time. because I'm a party administrator, I was a party administrator. You know, when I was arguing, people were laughing. I said, it doesn't concern you. Are you a member of this party? When you breach the provision of the law, you want to proceed, anything goes. It's because of anything goes that Nigerians are beginning to get surprised at these hard decisions of the courts. When the court wants to do something,
parties deserve the kind of punishment.
Yes, they deserve. They deserve because, like you say, this is a time for political parties to conduct their primaries to bring out their candidates. You will not do that. You will not comply with it, and you want to continue. If you enforce the law, you catch those people who are violating the law. So now, in terms of volume of votes, 534,000 to 189,000. It is it's of no moment, because once that candidate got